Good morning, everybody. I am the Curious Psych NP, and today you guys are going to be following me so you can see what a day in the life of being a clinical instructor is like. It is 5 o'clock in the morning right now. I don't normally get up this early, but we have to go to the hospital today by 6:30 so that the students can catch a shift handoff report. I'm going to finish my coffee and I'll see you guys in the car. We are on our way to the hospital right now. I'm getting there a little bit early for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to check in with the charge nurse of the psych unit to see if there's been any problematic patients, if there's anything that we should be watching out for. And then two, to pick up the conference room key. So we are so fortunate at this particular location that they do provide us a conference room where I can kind of set up camp. Some of you guys might be wondering, you're a nurse practitioner, what are you doing teaching BSN students? Because I love it. I really do. It sucks for me personally because I don't wake up this early, but you have to consider that it's only, well, it depends on the school. There are some schools that have psych clinicals year-round, in which case the obligation is a little greater. However, this particular school only has psych rotations once a year. So really for 9 months out of the year, I don't really have to do anything. I just have to buckle down the term that the psych clinicals are going on. And that's totally fine. So I got this opportunity because number one, I'm an alumni of the school and I maintain good relationships with my former advisor, and she had actually recommended me for this position. Most nursing schools are so desperate for clinical instructors, so if you have any sort of interest in education or mentorship, I would highly recommend you just take a stab at it. I'm only doing 1 day a week because I have a full-time job, but some clinical instructors do 2 or even 3 days a week. So it's really just up to you and however much time you commit. So scheduling wise, you can make it work. And the reason I like this is because I can do this on weekends. So I don't have to give up my full-time job, my Monday through Friday job in order to do this. I can make it work for me. So that's really nice. If you're looking for some flexibility, it's actually quite doable. The other thing is, it can get a little bit tricky if you do have events planned on whatever day that you decide to do clinicals. And in that case, you just need to tell the faculty before then so they can make arrangements to either have a student be with another clinical instructor and shift their day, or maybe another clinical instructor will volunteer to take your spot. Or in my case, I had a wedding one of these Saturdays. So what happened was they're actually allowing us to extend our clinicals by an extra day. Let's talk about reasons why I love my job. As I'm sure you guys all know by now, I love education. I love mentoring. I love helping other people reach their full potential, and that is entirely this job. The way that this university is structured, psych clinicals are the very first rotation that these students go through. It's so exciting to be able to help mold these students from the ground up because this is their first taste of what working in a hospital is like. And yeah, you know, it's so different from the other floors, but I'm really glad that they do it this way because the skills that you learn in psych, you truly can take with you wherever you go. And so that's always what I'm constantly telling my students from day one. Well, what I'm telling my students from day one is everybody has mental health challenges, and it is okay. And it doesn't mean we should be treating them any different, because you and I have all had anxiety and depression, and if you haven't, you're not living, because that's just life. Stressors happen, and that's why you get anxious. That's our fight or flight response. It's part of our nature. It's okay to feel those things. And so very first thing I want to do is help normalize mental health and help them realize that it's okay to talk about. It's not a sign of weakness. It doesn't mean that you're not strong enough or whatever. It's just you're human. Especially in light of the pandemic, this has become ever more apparent since more people are now focusing on mental health and realizing just how much it impacts everything in our lives. So this is actually a really exciting time to be a clinical instructor. Second thing that I really try to emphasize to my students is I always ask them at the beginning, okay, like raise your hands if you are interested at all in pursuing psych. So I'll have about 5-6 students, and I will be surprised if more than one of them raises their hand. Nobody wants to do psych. It's not cool, it's not ER, it's not ICU, you know, some people like peds, some people want to do OB. Very rarely do people want to do psych. Most likely because of the stigma it has, and some people think it's not real nursing. So the second thing I always want to tell students is that psych nursing is real nursing, and actually to me it is the true essence of nursing. A lot of nursing tends to be task oriented, and definitely it's not something I can do. I've done ICU before and I'm just not wired that way. I'm not that detail oriented. It's very difficult for me to pick up on those kind of tiny, minute changes. So I can't do that. My strength lies in communication, building rapport and therapeutic listening. And these are all skills that can be translated to any field. And that's why psych is so cool, because even if you decide that psych is not the route that you want to go, all the lessons that you learn in psych, you can carry with you wherever you go, and it will make you a much stronger nurse for it. So those are the things that I tell my students from the beginning, just so they have a frame of reference as to what they might anticipate on picking up during this rotation. And we are just about getting to our exit right now. So I'm going to turn this off, and then I'm going to try to give you guys a brief tour before we meet our students. So here is my office for today, and so this is where we will be having lunch and post-conference. So today's a really special day because I went up first to talk to the charge and see what was going on in the unit, and it turns out that they've actually reopened their adolescent unit, which is super exciting. I know that at least one of my students wants to work with peds, so this is a perfect opportunity because I think adolescent psych and the way you approach it is very different from how you would approach adult psych. There wasn't too much time to really go over the differences between adult and adolescent psych, so I will be spending more time on an adolescent unit today to give my students some tidbits about how to handle the adolescent population as opposed to the adult population. I typically have 5 or 6 students. This time I have 6 students. So, and there's 3 different units here. So I divided up, so 2 students every unit, and they all have the buddy system, which means that if one of them leaves to use the restroom, the other student has to go with them. They always have to be kind of within each other's field of vision. So I don't want them paired at the hip necessarily, but it's just to give them an extra support in case something happens. Obviously the staff are there too to help support. We only have 2 more clinical days, so today and next week. So it's up to me to try to figure out how to get my students the best experience possible. So before the entire rotation has started, I had already input onto like a Word document where each student was going to be every single week. And I kind of just randomly populated this, trying to get them the largest range of experience possible. So since the schedule is already set for today and they have a major assignment coming up that requires them to have a very therapeutic conversation with your patient, I'm not going to pull the kids off the unit that are already on the adolescent unit today. So I'm going to give them the whole day today. So next week, it being our last week, I want to make sure the other 4 students have an equal opportunity to be able to at least get some exposure on the adolescent unit. So I think I'm going to change up the rotation. So the students that were on adolescent unit today will be on a different unit next week, and the 4 other students will switch halfway through between their unit and then the adolescent unit, so that everybody has a chance to rotate on that unit. I think that's the most fair. So yeah, I'm really excited. But yeah, obviously as a clinical instructor, you have to be flexible and you have to really try to seize any opportunities for education that you can. Right now it's about 7:30, so the students and the staff are starting their day. Patients are starting to wake up. There's going to be group therapy. Right now the students are at the end of their rotation. Typically at the beginning of the rotation, I check my students very frequently because I want to make sure that they know that they feel supported, especially because psych is so different, and there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and just about the unknown. Since we're now towards the end of clinicals, I don't actually go out onto the unit as much because number one, I don't want to disrupt the unit milieu. I don't want to interrupt the staff members who might be providing care. I don't want to disturb the patients who are probably wondering who's this random person walking around all the time, which could be increasing paranoia, etc. And I want to offer my students the opportunity to have an uninterrupted therapeutic rapport with whatever patients that they're working with that day. So I'll probably hang out here for maybe like an hour, and then I'll go make my first rounds. So I was actually kicked out of my office because they ran out of places to do group therapy. So thought this would be the perfect opportunity to walk around a little bit. I just finished rounding on all my kids again, making sure that they're okay. So let's go see what they have in the cafeteria. Right now, I'm sitting just outside the building because I lost my conference room for a little bit. So while I'm waiting to be let back inside, I figured this would be a good opportunity to address some more questions that have come up. So somebody wanted to know what resources to bring into clinicals. So psych clinicals is a little bit different than the other medical fields in that you're actually supposed to try not to bring as much as possible. And the reason for this is because you don't want to accidentally let the patients grab anything, be it papers or pens or anything like that they could either use to hurt themselves or be a violation of HIPAA. So actually I ask my students not to bring anything. If anything, they can bring like a sack lunch or like a water bottle, but they have to keep it in the nurse's station or the report room or somewhere off the main unit. Some things that I would suggest that students do instead of bringing things to clinical is to study beforehand. When I tell students what I'm lecturing on for the next week, I will tell them to go home and do some research on their own about, say, a particular disease state. So let's say depression, so that includes the different symptoms, the medications, and then those things we will go over in post-conference. And I'll be asking them questions about what they learned either in class or on their own, and then I'll go off of that and elaborate on things that they might not understand or key points that I feel like they need to know. Here's a tip for future clinical instructors. When you do teach, you can lecture about whatever you want. They do have their theory classes and you can try to follow along with them. I felt like the topics that were most important didn't necessarily align with what the theory classes were emphasizing, because like for instance, a theory class, one of the first lessons that they taught was on ADHD, and that's not typically something you see in a hospital inpatient setting. So I wanted to focus more on the things that would make most sense for them in a clinical inpatient setting. You have to think about that. You have to think about what's most useful for your students to know, and also you have to think about how much time you have. So for this particular rotation, we have 9 weeks. So I don't sit there before the entire rotation and think, okay, this week I'm going to lecture on this week I'm going to lecture on this, etc. I kind of make it up as I go, but generally by the end of every week, I can tell them what to expect for the next week. And it might change depending on what the students' interests are, and if they want more education about a particular topic, then I'll delve more into that next week. So again, you have to be very flexible in this position, because you always want to encourage your students to ask questions and to grow and to learn. If you're lecturing about a topic that they don't care care about, they're going to tune you out and they're going to think psych is super boring. So our goal here is to make psych really exciting and help students understand why psych is so important and how they can use these skills and develop them further. So for instance, for the first week, I really emphasized patient safety, staff safety, student safety, the unit milieu, the basic workflow of the entire unit. I wanted them to think about, okay, why are there no locks on the doors? Why is everything rounded? Why do they have so many groups throughout the day? Why do they do shift handoff report all in a group? So all of these things are very particular to psych, and being able to answer these questions can help put you in the mindset of what the rest of the rotation is going to look like and what you should be looking for. And plus, I want the students to feel safe, because ultimately safety is our first priority always. The second week, I went over therapeutic communication, and I taught them basic communication skills and techniques like motivational interviewing. We went over therapeutic exercises and coping skills that they could start demonstrating to their patients. Motivation interviewing in particular was something my students are very interested in, and over the course of the next several weeks, they asked me to provide more examples and demonstrate for them what it looks like. So this is something that I incorporated into other lectures. After the first couple of weeks, when I knew that they had a solid foundation of what psych nursing was, then we started going over different disease states. So the ones that are most common in inpatient psych are typically depression, the bipolar spectrum, and the schizophrenia spectrum. So I spent the last couple of weeks going over each disease state, the medications, the symptoms, and the patient education that we can provide for them. For this particular course, they have one graded assignment, which for them is due after this week. They have a rough draft of this due somewhere in the middle of the week. And so what this final project is, it's called a communication analysis paper. It's where they choose one specific interaction with a patient. They basically analyze the heck out of it, meaning that they see if their conversation was therapeutic or not, how it could have gone better. So around halfway through the term, it was when their rough draft of their analysis was due. So during the shift, I went around to every student individually to go over their analysis with them, where things could be improved upon. And I also talked with them individually about their progress, what they wanted to learn, what they felt like could be improved, etc. Because one of the things as a good instructor is you should always be receptive to feedback and try to see ways in which you can improve and help enhance your students' learning. When I'm not out there on the unit, I'm going to be mostly spending time on my laptop, catching up on other work. I'm going to be preparing for my post-conference lecture today and just kind of hanging out, honestly. Hi. You may have noticed that I have changed clothes, and the reason for that is because I lost half my footage. In a way, it's a good thing, because this means that I actually get to show you 2 of the days in the life of a psych clinical instructor. And today is really special because it is actually my students' last day, so it's going to be a little bit different. So we have some time before I have to round on my students, so I figured it'd be a great opportunity to answer some of the questions that you guys have. If you guys aren't already, then please follow me on Instagram, because this is the place where you can post any questions that you have for any upcoming videos that I have going on. So some questions that I've gotten are, someone wanted to know how to chart for psych because it's very different compared to the other units. And this is very true. What you guys might have noticed is that on the floors, it's very much like a checkbox or very short words, but in psych nursing it's completely different. We still have checkboxes, but actually the majority of our assessment comes in a narrative box form. And the reason for this is because your assessment is primarily done through talking to the patient and just looking at them and seeing with your own eyes how they're behaving, how they're moving, how they're presenting, etc. So our assessment is done through what's called the MSE, or mental status exam, and it covers a variety of different topics like their attitude, behavior, the mood, the thought process, level of insight, and etc. And this is very hard to quantify. For instance, you can't say somebody's level of insight is 7 out of 10. What does that mean? So this is why we have that narrative box to really help us capture what is exactly going on. Consider it like you're writing a story. If you say put a checkbox that the patient's affect is depressed, then describe what that means. What about that patient's presentation shows you that they are feeling depressed? Maybe they're tearful, maybe they have slumped shoulders. And all these things you can provide in the narrative box form. So the checkbox is a very short descriptor of what's going on with the patient. A narrative box allows you to elaborate on what you've been assessing for the patient. For the narrative box, we especially love direct quotes from the patient because that really helps illustrate what the patient themselves feels like they're going through. So for instance, if you say that the patient is having hallucinations, well, that by itself could mean pretty much anything. Maybe they are having voices to hurt themselves, or maybe they're having voices of little bunnies and fairies telling them that everybody's going to have a great day today. So the context is also very important. So that's why we have that narrative box form. So when you're writing your assessment, then just try to keep it in the mindset of an outsider looking at this note. How can you best describe what's going on so that any outside person looking at this note can have a good idea of what's going on? Okay, another question that I received is, what do you do to prepare for a clinical day? So as a teacher, what I do to prepare for the day is essentially come up with a lesson plan for the day. So there's 3 opportunities for lecturing: pre-conference, lunch, and post-conference. And everybody's a little bit different, but this is just how I structure my day. Pre-conference to me is a little bit shorter, and it starts at the very beginning of the day before the students ever go onto the unit. And what I do in pre-conference is help kind of prepare them for the day and help tell them what things I want them to focus on. So for instance, if the week before we were working on therapeutic communication, then during pre-conference, I'll reinforce that and say, hey guys, today I want your goal to be to have one therapeutic conversation with a patient. During lunchtime, I'll generally give that to my students, but if, say, at the very end, everybody's done eating, then I'll answer questions that any of the students might have had throughout the day, or we'll talk about any experiences that the students have had, because they are all on different units. So it's really nice to come together as a group to see what other students are experiencing and to pull all of that together. So I'll do like a mini lecture based on whatever's going on the unit. And finally, post-conference is pretty set. So during that day, I'll be thinking throughout the day about what specifically I'm going to be lecturing on, and maybe I'll look up some articles to share with my students that I feel might be relevant. Another good question that I got was, what is taught in the scope of a psych nursing student? And this will depend on the school and the hospital on what they allow the student to do. For instance, this particular school does not allow students to do blood sugar checks. And the reason for this is because if you do a blood sugar check, then you have to provide insulin. If you're not the nurse, then you can't drop the insulin, which means that the nurse would then have to go back in and double check the blood sugar anyway. So the patient would be getting poked twice. So it's not fair to the patient. So at this particular school, the students are not allowed to do that. But this might be different for other schools. So my students don't pass any medication here. So the way that I get around that is I'll sit with them and we'll pull up a patient and we'll go over the medications, and I'll ask them to pretend to give me the medication as if I was the patient. So we still have some time left. This is probably a great time to plug the Psych Nurse Practitioner Group. You guys might be familiar with us from our Psych NP handbook, which has been very, very popular. So thank you guys very, very much. And I wanted to let you guys know that we also just launched a new course called How to Open Up Your Own Telepsychiatry Clinic. So you can find it on Teachable. I will link it in the description box below. We spent a lot of time on this course, and because we all have our own private practices, we pull together all of our experience, so you don't have to make the same mistakes that we did. And right now we're working on a bunch of other projects right now, so I'm going to give you guys an exclusive sneak peek at one of our newest projects. We are currently working on a course to teach beginning clinicians how to perform psychiatric evaluations, and I'm currently in the process of doing the voiceover for it. In this course, we will define what an initial psychiatric evaluation is and its purpose. We will discuss general evaluations and their settings. We will demonstrate the different domains that comprises an initial evaluation. Finally, we will put everything we have learned together by breaking down an example of a psychiatric evaluation, briefly discuss how to diagnose the patient, and how to follow up afterwards. We have a break right now, so we're going to go ahead and visit our friend. Post-conference is typically about an hour long. It kind of just depends on what we're talking about, how many questions the students have. It can be shorter or longer depending, but I would say pretty much it's always about an hour long. And every week I want to teach the students something different and something useful. So this week I will be lecturing on substance use, and I wanted to devote an entire post-conference to this because there's so many different substances that can be used. So I felt like it deserved its own lecture. Okay guys, so welcome to post-conference. All right, so like we talked about last time, we're going to be talking about substance use. Okay, so what do you guys think is the most common substance use disorder? Which substance is most abused?
Alcohol.
Yeah, you said that very confidently. Good for you. So what are some risks of using alcohol?
Liver disease.
Liver disease, yeah.
Was GI bleeding one of them?
GI bleeding, yep.
Danger to self and danger to others.
How come?
Like, it's a like CNS depressant, so then you can like if you're driving or like you lose inhibition too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you hit on something, CNS depression. And so you'll often hear that people use alcohol as a way to wind down from the day. They use it to help them with their anxiety or to help them sleep at night. So why do we advise against this?
It's not a healthy coping mechanism?
Yes, you're correct. Basically for all the reasons that we listed. So there's physical, there's mental ramifications of it. And because it is a CNS depressant, it can actually make people more depressed than beforehand. So some people will say, oh, but I use it to help me with my depression. It makes me forget about my worries, blah, 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 blah. But what it does, it then makes them more depressed. So it's not actually helping. It's like a positive feedback loop. Hi, welcome to my studio. As you can tell, I am no longer at the hospital, and the reason for that is because I ran out of storage on my phone. So it's okay because I was pretty much at the end of our day already. So I'll just quickly sum up what happens at the end of the day normally. After I give post-conference, and as you saw, the lecture I was giving that day was on substance use, I quickly summed up the whole day and gave them their assignments for the next week. So as it is their last week, I actually won't be focusing on mental health topics anymore. Instead, what I really want my students to focus on is what they want to do with their future, if they have any questions about just their own personal career paths, whether it's in a specialty or if they want to pursue further education. So next week we can all meet together and I can address all those questions, share some of my experiences. And also next week I want to go around individually to all of my students, sit down one-on-one with them, and basically essentially give them a little bit of a career counseling type thing so they know what to look for as they move forward in their nursing school. If you're a clinical instructor and you have some questions about how to best support your students, then please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, share tips and advice. And thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya. Hit that thumbs up button if you want more ASMR videos like this. Oh man. It's so early right now.